The quiet panic. You know that feeling when you're driving home late at night, maybe from a friend's house or after working a double shift, and you see something that just doesn't make sense. Something that makes you question whether you're more tired than you thought, or if what you're seeing is actually real. Well, that's exactly what happened to me 3 months ago, and I'm still trying to wrap my head around it. I was coming back from my cousin's birthday party around 2 in the morning. It was one of those clear October nights where the air is crisp and you can see every star in the sky. I'd driven this route 100 times before, straight down Highway 47 past the old grain silos, through the valley, and then up the hill toward my neighborhood. Nothing ever changes on that stretch of road. It's just farmland, a few scattered houses, and darkness. But that night was different. As I crested the hill right before the turnoff to Miller's farm, I saw lights in the distance. Not house lights or street lights. These were moving, colorful, almost dancing across the horizon. At first, I thought maybe it was a house fire or some kind of emergency situation. But as I got closer, the lights became more defined, more organized. They were arranged in patterns, spinning and flashing in a way that seemed almost musical. That's when I realized what I was looking at. It was a carnival, a full-blown traveling carnival set up in the middle of Peterson's wheat field, complete with a Ferris wheel, spinning rides, game booths, and what looked like dozens of people walking around between the attractions. The weird part wasn't just that there was a carnival in the middle of nowhere at 2 in the morning. The weird part was that Peterson's field had been empty when I drove past it earlier that evening. I pulled over to the side of the road and just sat there for a minute, trying to process what I was seeing. The carnival was maybe a quarter-mile away, but I could hear the faint sound of calliope music drifting across the field. You know that slightly off-key, haunting melody that carousel music makes. It was exactly that, but there was something wrong with it. The tempo was too slow, and every few notes seemed to hang in the air just a little too long. Now, I'm not the type of person who believes in supernatural stuff. I watch those ghost hunting shows for entertainment, but I've always been pretty skeptical about anything that can't be explained rationally. So my first thought was that maybe some traveling carnival had gotten permission to set up overnight, and they were doing some kind of late-night maintenance or setup for the next day. It seemed like the most logical explanation. But then I started thinking about the logistics. How does an entire carnival appear in a field in the span of 4 hours? When I'd driven past Peterson's property around 10 that evening, there hadn't been so much as a single trailer in sight. Now there was a complete midway with rides that looked like they'd been operating for weeks. The Ferris wheel alone would take hours to assemble, and I could see it slowly turning, its cars swaying gently in the night breeze. I grabbed my phone to take a picture because I knew nobody would believe this story without proof. But when I held up my phone and tried to focus on the carnival, the screen just showed darkness. I could see the lights with my own eyes, clear as day, but my phone camera wasn't picking up anything except the empty field. I tried adjusting the settings, turning on the flash, even getting out of my car to get a better angle. Nothing. The camera showed only black sky and dark ground. That's when I started to feel genuinely unsettled. I stood there on the side of the highway, looking back and forth between what my eyes were showing me and what my phone was showing me, and I couldn't make sense of the disconnect. The carnival was right there. I could see people walking around. I could hear the music, the distant sound of laughter, even what sounded like a barker calling out to potential customers. But my phone insisted that nothing was there. I decided to drive closer. I know that sounds stupid in retrospect, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled back onto the highway and drove until I reached the dirt access road that leads into Peterson's field. There was no gate, no signs, no indication that anyone had permission to be there. Just tire tracks in the dirt leading toward the lights. As I turned down that access road, the carnival seemed to grow larger and more detailed. I could make out individual rides now. A tilt-a-whirl, bumper cars. One of those spinning octopus rides with cars that go up and down. There were game booths lined up along what looked like a makeshift midway, and I could see stuffed animals hanging from the prize displays. Everything looked exactly like you'd expect a traveling carnival to look, except for one thing that made my skin crawl. All the people I could see walking around were wearing the same clothes. Not uniforms exactly, but similar outfits. Dark pants or skirts, white shirts, and what looked like old-fashioned suspenders or vests. From a distance, they looked like they were dressed for some kind of historical reenactment, maybe from the 1920s or 1930s. But there were dozens of them, all dressed almost identically, moving between the rides and booths in a way that seemed strangely choreographed. I parked about 50 yards away from the edge of the carnival and sat in my car, engine running, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to just drive away and pretend I'd never seen any of this. But another part of me, the part that had always been drawn to mysteries and unexplained phenomena, wanted to get out and investigate. I compromised by rolling down my window and listening more carefully to the sounds coming from the carnival. The music was definitely wrong. What I'd initially taken for calliope music was actually something much stranger. It sounded like multiple songs playing at once, but they were all slightly out of sync with each other. Imagine hearing a carousel song, a circus march, and a waltz all playing simultaneously, but each one at a slightly different speed. The result was this layered, discordant melody that was almost hypnotic but deeply unsettling at the same time. And the laughter I'd been hearing wasn't quite right either. It was too uniform, too rhythmic. Real laughter has peaks and valleys, moments where it builds and moments where it fades. This sounded more like a recording of laughter being played on a loop, the same pattern repeating every 30 seconds or so. I was sitting there, windows down, trying to make sense of what I was experiencing, when I noticed that one of the figures near the game booths had stopped moving and seemed to be looking in my direction. Even from 50 yards away, I could tell that whoever it was had turned their full attention toward my car. Then another figure stopped and turned. Then another. Within maybe 10 seconds, every person I could see at the carnival had stopped what they were doing and turned to face me. They weren't waving or calling out or showing any signs of normal human curiosity about a visitor. They were just standing there perfectly still, all facing my direction like some kind of eerie tableau. That's when I made the decision to get the hell out of there. I threw my car into reverse, backed up until I could turn around, and drove back to the highway as fast as I dared on that narrow dirt road. When I reached the pavement and looked back toward the field, the carnival was still there, lights still spinning, music still playing. But now I couldn't see any of the people. The midway looked completely deserted. I drove straight home, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, and spent the rest of the night sitting by my bedroom window, looking out toward the direction of Peterson's field. I couldn't see the lights from my house, but I kept thinking I could hear that strange, layered music drifting on the wind. The next morning, I drove back to Peterson's field. The carnival was gone, not just packed up and moved, completely gone, like it had never been there at all. No tire tracks except for my own from the night before. No trampled grass where the rides had been. No trash or debris that you'd expect to find after a carnival had spent even one night in a location. I talked to Peterson himself a few days later, casually asking if he'd rented his field to anyone recently. He looked at me like I was crazy and said nobody had been on his property in months. When I pressed him about it, describing what I'd seen, he got this strange look on his face and told me that people had been telling stories about lights in that field for decades. Stories that went back to his grandfather's time and probably earlier than that. That's when I started doing research. And what I found changed everything I thought I knew about that night. The local library had newspaper archives going back to 1887, and I spent hours digging through old microfiche files, searching for any mention of unexplained lights or carnival sightings in our area. What I found made my blood run cold. The first report was from October 1923. A farmer named William Hayes claimed he saw a traveling carnival set up in what is now Peterson's field. He described the same thing I'd experienced: lights appearing overnight, music that didn't sound quite right, and people dressed in old-fashioned clothing. Hayes went to investigate the next morning and found nothing. The newspaper treated it like a curiosity, a case of a tired farmer seeing things after a long day of harvest work. But then I found another report from October 1941. Different farmer, same field, identical story. This time the newspaper was less dismissive, noting that Hayes's old account had been remarkably similar. The 1941 witness, a man named Robert Kowalski, added details that matched my experience perfectly. He mentioned how his camera wouldn't capture the carnival, how the people all stopped and stared at him when he got too close, and how the music sounded like multiple songs playing at once. The pattern continued. October 1959, October 1967, October 1985, October 2003. Every 18 years, like clockwork, someone reported seeing the same carnival in the same field, always at night, always in October, always lasting just one evening before vanishing without a trace. The witnesses were different ages, different backgrounds, different levels of credibility, but their stories were virtually identical. I started reaching out to some of these people, the ones who were still alive. Robert Kowalski was in his 90s, but still sharp, living in a nursing home about 30 miles away. When I called him and mentioned Peterson's field, he went quiet for a long moment before asking me to come see him in person. Kowalski's room was small and sterile, but he was alert and eager to talk once I explained why I was there. He pulled out a notebook that he'd kept for decades, filled with his own research into what he called the Midnight Carnival. According to his notes, similar phenomena had been reported in farming communities across the Midwest, always following the same pattern, appearing every 18 years, always in October, always in remote fields. "The thing that bothers me most," Kowalski told me, his hands shaking slightly as he turned the pages of his notebook, "is that I've never been able to figure out what it wants. Why does it keep coming back? Why does it let itself be seen but only by one person at a time? And why 18 years? He showed me sketches he'd made from memory, detailed drawings of the carnival rides, the game booths, even some of the people he'd seen. The faces in his drawings were disturbing, not because they were monstrous or obviously supernatural, but because they looked so normal yet somehow wrong. Their expressions were too neutral, their postures too perfect, like mannequins arranged to look human but not quite achieving it. I went back to that field every October for 40 years, Kowalski continued, hoping to see it again, hoping to get some answers. But it never appeared for me twice. I think once you've seen it, once you've acknowledged it exists, it moves on to someone else. That conversation haunted me for weeks. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd become part of something much larger and older than I'd initially realized. The Midnight Carnival wasn't just a strange experience I'd had. It was part of a pattern that stretched back generations, possibly centuries. I started having dreams about it. Always the same scenario. I'm walking through the carnival midway, surrounded by those eerily dressed figures, trying to find my way to the center where I'm convinced I'll find some kind of answer. But every time I get close to what feels like the heart of the carnival, I wake up with the sound of that discordant music still echoing in my head. The worst part is the waiting. If the pattern holds true, the carnival won't appear again until October 2041. I'll be in my 60s by then, assuming I live that long. Someone else will be driving down Highway 47 late at night. Someone else will see those impossible lights dancing across Peterson's field, and someone else will have their entire understanding of reality shaken to its core. But here's what really keeps me awake at night. What if the 18-year cycle is accelerating? What if whatever force or entity is behind the Midnight Carnival is growing stronger, more frequent in its appearances? What if next October or the October after that, those lights appear again? I've started driving past Peterson's field every few weeks, usually late at night when I can't sleep. The field looks perfectly normal, just empty farmland stretching toward the horizon. But sometimes when the wind is blowing just right, I swear I can hear the faint echo of carnival music drifting across the darkness. 3 months have passed since my encounter, and I've shared this story with exactly 4 people. Peterson himself, Kowalski, my sister, and now all of you. Most people would dismiss this as an elaborate hoax or the product of an overactive imagination. I understand that skepticism because I used to be the same way. But if you ever find yourself driving through rural farmland late at night, and you see lights where there shouldn't be any lights, and you hear music that doesn't sound quite right, take my advice. Keep driving. Don't investigate, don't try to take pictures, and don't convince yourself that there's a rational explanation, because some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some experiences are meant to be survived and remembered, passed down as warnings to the next person who might encounter something that doesn't belong in our world. The Midnight Carnival never really leaves. It's always there, waiting in the spaces between what we know and what we can't explain, ready to reveal itself to the next curious soul who happens to be in the right place at the wrong time. And 18 years from now, someone else will see those lights dancing across Peterson's field, and the cycle will continue.